If you'd like to get involved with Shoreditch Radio, or if you run any local projects or events, please contact us at info@shoreditchradio.co.uk.
Esky boy, don't know. Out to all my people.
Hello, we're Beambar.
Hi, this is Dean from Lois and the Love.
This is Roman from Breton.
I am Adam Farsick.
I'm Orlando from the Maccabees.
I am Colin Peters.
I'm Lewis from Chapel Club.
Hi, this is Guy from Zulu Winter.
Hello, this is Carl Barat.
Hey, this is Rita Ora, and you're listening to Shoreditch Radio. Yes!
Good evening. This is the David Watson Show. I'm David Watson, taking my fortnightly slot on this show. Tonight, looking forward to discussing lots of interesting things. Above all, with my most esteemed guest, Garth Hewitt, and also Maha Younes coming back, and she's been a great friend to the show, and she's going to have particularly a different angle to my own to talk to our special guest about on his particular. He does many different ventures, many different projects, but one of which he's a founder of Amos Trust, a charity that works not just in Palestine but also in Nicaragua and Brazil, and he's going to be talking to us about that a little bit later. He's also a clergyman, a singer, a songwriter and author, so we've got lots of things we're going to be talking to him about. Evening, Garth.
Evening, nice to be with you.
Thank you for coming. And evening, Maha.
Good evening, hi.
Brilliant. And so before we move on to Garth's projects, we're going to look a bit at the news in the past week. Let's first of all talk a bit about Greece. Greece has finally agreed, or the Greek Parliament agreed to the bailout deal that they'd had a marathon discussion about. But should we view this as positively? I mean, it sparked riots in Greece. What do you think, Garth?
I'm quite disturbed by it because it seems to me that the people of Greece made their point that they had had enough of austerity, and they've been punished and told they shouldn't have said that, and therefore a decision was made from Brussels instead of from Athens. And I think we should be very concerned. It seems to me that this very neoliberal economic venture in Europe is dominating now how countries behave, and was this what the EU was set up for? I certainly see a lot of question marks.
It seemed even stranger to me because the Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, is saying that he doesn't agree with it, and yet he's asking people to vote for it. There seems to be a lot of inconsistency there. What do you think, Maha?
Well, I guess they don't have a choice, do they? I mean, what else? That's the question. Can we come up with a better deal for them? It's really disturbing that the bailout is 7.1 billion, and Athens Olympics in 2004 cost 9 billion. So we have to be concerned with how did they arrive to that situation. And I guess we should look at it positively from a point that they could pay the debt on Monday, which is due on Monday. Their banks can reopen again. They could hopefully go back to normality, maybe reduce the level of uncertainty, and then work from there. I think what they need to do now is they have to, I understand the issues with Europe, but they have to perhaps accept what they've got now and work from here. They have to save 12 billion pounds or euros in the next 3 years. So how can we achieve that? They need to concentrate on how they can revive their economy with what they have.
So if you were in the Greek Parliament, you would have voted for it. Is that right?
Well, if I didn't have any other option, what else do you have?
Garth, what do you think?
I think there's another option, and it's to say no. And I think that the last loan, I believe it was as much as 90%, went back to bankers who were lending. It isn't benefiting the people at all. There must be another way, and I think Europe is not being adventurous in exploring that. How about letting them off the debt? How about, we recognise there's been all sorts of problems in the past, problems of the way Greece has been run, problems of corruption, all sorts of problems. But there are problems of bankers, there are problems of the IMF, there are problems with all, the very way that money is lent, and then the people and the poorest people are forced to pay for it. So I think there is an alternative, and I think we've missed the opportunity to discuss it. And I think we should be very worried about seeing what's happened to Greece.
Don't you think, though, Garth, that if they had said no, then that would have meant their inevitable exit from the euro, and
Yes.
that would have been a major upheaval for the people of Greece. I mean, for one thing, where would they've got the new currency? Would they've gone back to the drachma? You know, they would have had to have a time when there was no money to spend at all, wouldn't they?
I think so, but why were the banks closed? This was all part of making sure they did what they were told. Now, so they are.
Yeah.
You're quite right. I mean, in a sense, their options were taken away. So Tsipras has to turn round and do exactly the opposite. Okay, if the banks were opened and there was a way of taking them to the next stage, I think something more creative could have been attempted. I feel alarmed about where we're at, but yes, they're threatened. If there's no money, people are going to be in a terrible state, and they are already.
I feel that if Tsipras is saying he doesn't agree with the deal that he's presenting to the people, and also they've said they don't agree with it, and in fact what he's presenting to the Parliament now is even worse, then shouldn't he resign?
I think quite possibly,
yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Well, we were facing, I mean, what happened the last 3 weeks? We were facing a state that is failing. So it is possible that could have been even worse, you know, from what we arrived to. I'm being a little... I know, I agree with you completely, Gareth, actually. I don't doubt what you just said, but it's just because can we believe in the economic system in Greece to bring it up again? And that's what Alexis has a big... the challenge that he has is to come up with an economical plan that would turn things around, and he has few years to do this. So that's the challenge. Fine, we arrived here, we don't want to talk about what if we said no, etc. We are here, can we deal with it? And I think that's the biggest challenge he has, and he maybe should come up with a government that is more economist rather than businessmen to handle the Greek economy.
The finance minister, indeed, in Greece has resigned, or the one who was involved before the referendum, hasn't he? So the IMF itself has said that Greece's debt is unsustainable. So even America has said that the new deal presented to the Greek Parliament is overly harsh, and it's not fair at all. Which is strange coming from the US of A, isn't it?
Yes, well, they are a little bit anti-EU, aren't they? So they have to say something that is anti-EU.
I don't think the Americans are anti-EU, to be honest. I think that they're very worried by the prospect of Britain leaving the EU. They want Britain in there as a voice, as a kind of neoliberal voice. That's my view.
That's true. Yeah.
But it's interesting that some commentators from the left recently, such as George Monbiot and Owen Jones, have been saying that they're having doubts about their belief in Britain staying in the EU. Garth, do you think there's a case for re-evaluating our membership of the EU?
Well, this really surprised me and raises big question marks. And funnily enough, much as I dislike them, I haven't heard UKIP say anything. They're probably sitting in a pub
very
somewhere,
quiet, haven't they?
drinking heavily. But because in a sense it seems to be their opportunity to say to people, look, this is how bad it is.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure you want to still be in this? Mm-hmm. Now, okay, we're not exactly tied up in the same way in terms of finance, but nevertheless, I think it raises questions about Europe. And I'm certainly feel less certain about the EU in the light of this. I see the domination of another country. Is that what's meant to happen, dominating others? It worries me, and I think we should all at least start to address it in a different way now.
Mm-hmm. Do you see the EU as a positive force, Maha?
Yes, I think it's just the banking system that failed it, and I think if we want to review the EU as a system or as establishment, we need to go to the core of this, which is the business deals and the banking system that has failed us. And I think that is the biggest problem. It's bigger than the EU. EU as an idea is an interesting idea. It's good. It's always good to unite and always help each other, bail each other out, etc. But then if you have a banking system that is not working, that you rely on, then that's where your problem is. That's where you need to review it.
Yes.
So I feel positive about the EU, but not positive about the banking system. That's my answer.
I think that's right.
Well, staying on matters European, let's look a little bit at the news that odds for Jeremy Corbyn to be elected the next leader of the Labour Party have been slashed, and he's now second favourite with the bookies. Do we think he can win? What do you think, Garth?
Yeah, I think so. I've been impressed with Jeremy for years. He's a terrific guy. His thoughts are great. His politics is superb. We can understand what he's saying. He's not giving us all that political gibberish which you normally get given. And it's very interesting, the type of criticism that's come up. Chuka Umana the other day said we can't have him because we've got to get into power, otherwise we're letting people down. And my question is, why have you got to get into power? You're behaving like Tories, so why do you have to get into power? Why not just have the Tories there? So Jeremy says, no, I have a vision of a better Labour Party, and I can tell you the history of it all, and he's a socialist in the best sense of that word, and people are saying, yeah, we'd give that a try. And if people say, oh, then he's not electable, that's not the worst thing in the world. At least there's a party that knows what it believes, and I believe could sort itself out and perhaps become electable down the road.
Would you call yourself a socialist?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm, in some sense of that word, I think that it's a very valuable position, and we've got a great history of that in the past. And the terror that seems to be in the Labour Party of using that word, I think they should stop. It's all right, you can use it and you don't have to faint.
I don't think Tony Blair ever used it, did he, when he was leader?
No, that was the problem.
What do you think, Maha? What is your take?
I think he could win if he can convince the average British person that he can handle the economy. And I think that was the failure with Ed Miliband, that he couldn't present anything sensible of how you can handle the economy, and somehow the Tories managed to win that, although they presented terrible plans.
I'm not sure that I agree with you, to be honest with you. I think the problem with, and it hurts me to say it because I don't think politics should be about image, but I think Ed Miliband's problem was an image problem.
But that's what I'm saying, yeah.
But exactly. I don't think it was so much, I think he did explain certain things. You know, it was some people have said it was a Tory light version of policy. You know, it wasn't really a socialist agenda, was it? There were some progressive measures in there, but there wasn't anything radical. But I think
he lacked some elements of leadership, I have to say. I mean, there was something about him that you could not follow.
This
like,
is true.
You just
he didn't
felt
have a lot
that
of gravitas.
Yeah, he didn't.
Think, yeah.
And that failed him. And I agree with you, but we are in the era of image when you have all our decisions made for us by the media.
But I think, you know what, I think
you have to give it a gravity.
I think Jeremy
you have to face it.
I think Jeremy Corbyn, although he might not be a poster boy a la David Miliband.
In contrary, I think most people said he looked attractive on these posters.
Well, okay, I'm maybe not the best judge. But
they liked people who didn't really know the politics of Labour, or because I know Jeremy Corbyn personally. Actually, I met him quite a few political campaigns, and the minute he speaks, he just grabs all these beautiful
just
leadership.
About what I was about to say. Actually, I think he's got the passion
and the popularity of a leader.
Yes, the passion and the self-belief that will override any doubts you've got about sort of being a poster boy type thing like David Miliband or Cameron, those sort of people. And actually, I think the Tories have a problem themselves, incidentally, without wanting to get into this conversation about who's going to replace Cameron, because I don't think George Osborne has that sort of gravitas to carry off the position of leader.
The reason I mentioned economy, because it is a central issue to this country now, with everything that Tories, with the new budget, with the plans and everything. And I think he is proven. Corbyn has proved so popular recently by the many people are backing him now. I think he is able to win, not even the Labour Party elections, even the next general elections. But he has the challenge because he will be faced with this question: the economy, and he needs to come up with a.
You know, what I thought you were going to say, which is my suspicion as well. Actually, is that if he were elected to be leader of the Labour Party, there would be forces, very right-wing forces, vested interests, whether you like talking about the media, especially the tabloid press, who would really go for him very viciously. And would he be able to fend that off? Would there be a strong enough reaction from the Labour Party, and would they all stand together, or would they just get cold feet and kick him out? Which has already been mooted. There was an article in the Telegraph this morning that would be what would happen if he got elected.
In fact, also the Guardian and the Observer, two articles against Corbyn, like he would fail the Labour Party. This is very negative energy. They are concerned because he's such a wonderful person, and he will perhaps change the politics of this country and the policies in that matter. What I'm finding surprising is Corbyn represents the electoral will.
Well,
opposite to all the elections we've had, and even now, with the Tories government and their policies, does not represent the electoral will.
Well, that's the suspicion,
really
isn't it?
Yeah.
With the vote that he found it really difficult to get the required number of votes from the Parliamentary Labour Party. But now that he has got at least on the ballot paper, the membership has increased. People are active. People are getting on his side. The unions are voting for him. I think there's a lot of people out there who are very worried, but I don't believe this idea that it's all Telegraph voters who are paying £3 to register as Labour voters. I think that's kind of nonsense, because it's in a Tory party's interest to get a right-wing Labour leader. That's because it makes it easier for them to implement their policies in the long term, surely.
Well, I don't know what the Telegraph readers have been up to, but I do think that where they all jump at him is people like the Murdoch press and so on, because they can't stand this thought, because they had it sewn up that there was New Labour, there was the Tories. Actually, they're all arguing who's going to be on this so-called middle ground, but it's the same politics. So, and someone comes along who is like a friend of the people and says, we can do things better, comes up with ideas, and you think, well, that's how we used to believe it. And lots of younger people are hearing that and saying, I'd go with that. And I think that Jeremy represents something really important. And if it's terrifying, the sort of leadership within the Labour Party or within the tabloid press, okay, so be it. That might be really good, because we're kind of fed up with a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
True. And since Jeremy to me represents the real democracy, because he is the will of the people.
Yes.
And that's and he is behind the people. So we should be very proud that hopefully for once we are delivering democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's see. It's going to be an interesting summer, I think. Much more interesting than the usual silly season of news that you get in a British summer. And they're sort of scratching around for stories, and they talk about squirrels that catch things in trees and things.
Is that about the hunting?
Let's talk a little bit about foreign affairs. We had the news that Iran and the USA have reached agreement on Iran's nuclear capabilities, and in reaction, Israel and Saudi Arabia both voiced their grave concern and said we should be very worried and we shouldn't. And I think the Israeli lobby in the United States has already been putting some groundwork in to try and convince senators and congressmen not to vote for it. The question I was going to ask was, should we care about the Israeli and Saudi Arabian governments worried about the Iran deal? What do you think, Garth?
I think the deal is extremely important, and I think the fact that America has done this is very significant. For some reason, Israel and Saudi Arabia seem to be working together on some things at the moment, and not least arms and so on. And I think we should be very worried about them and what's going on there. I think there is support where there is the support for something like ISIS coming from. Certainly their inspiration comes out of Saudi Arabia, I would think, with Wahhabism and so on. And they're getting a lot of weapons from various groups out there. And I think Iran represents an alternative. And the fact that America has established some link with them is very, very important, I think. It is ironic that where are the nuclear weapons in the Middle East? They're actually in Israel.
Yeah.
In Dimona, we know exactly where they are. So why is it that Netanyahu feels they've got to be stopped, but we, as in Israel, don't have to be stopped? I think we should care what they say, but I don't think we should take notice of it. I think we should keep an eye, though, on Israel and Saudi Arabia, because there are all sorts of issues that we need to address, not least about democracy within those countries, that I think the building of another relationship between America and with a big power like Iran is at least significant and could be a steadying thing within the Middle East.
I think if you hadn't had the Iraq War, we might not have this situation.
Yeah.
I think Iran has become more powerful as a result of the Iraq War and the Shia majority becoming the most powerful group in Iraq. What's your take on it, Maha?
I hate to concentrate on the religious side of it, being Shia, Sunni. That's what they like. This is the bigger plan, is to divide that area. And I was really surprised, actually, but it came from nowhere, that deal between Iran and the US. Suddenly, we hear of the deal happening. I should take it in two ways. We should be worried and not worried. We should care and not care at the same time. Not care in the sense that Israel will not be able to do anything without the backing from the USA. And I think the USA perhaps accepted that deal in a sense that it wanted to establish its powers regardless of Israel. Because Netanyahu upset the US when he went to Congress to speak behind Obama without his permission, and the congressmen were walking out when he was talking to them as if he's telling them what they should and shouldn't do, and that they didn't like that. So I think they wanted to have something else,
but
as you said, as an alternative.
Who gave him a standing ovation as well.
I know.
That's what made the news.
You know,
I wasn't aware that people walked out in the middle of his speech.
Some people did, and I think it's quite significant that the USA finally makes something, or makes a deal irrelevant of what Israel wants. And I think maybe Israel is worried, as you said, if we are lifting these sanctions and allowing a nuclear situation to happen in Iran, are more scrutinies going to happen on Daimuma and the nuclear weapons that Israel has? And what really annoys me of all of this, and I'm going to say something completely controversial,
go ahead,
is that we are worried about the nuclear powers of Iran, yet the only country there is that ever used a nuclear weapon against a population in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was actually the USA. And why aren't we addressing that? It was them who used it, and then yet they are the ones who are lifting and putting sanctions on other countries. I find that very, very strange. As to Saudi Arabia,
I don't think that's very controversial. That's a good point, but I think we all agree with that.
As to Saudi Arabia, I think, as you said, Saudi Arabia is this deal actually showed to us that in fact the politics in that region is so interesting, that there are backhand politics between Saudi Arabia and Israel. As you always told me, David, well, Saudi Arabia never recognized Israel, but actually all their dealings are with Israel, and that's showing us that there are dealings and talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and there is, as you said, Garth, there is things happening between them in that region. And at the same time, I'm not worried, because now Saudi Arabia is busy with Yemen, and I don't know what they're doing out there, but they are busy establishing their own.
It's there in the news. So,
I know that they're bombing it, but I'm wondering why are they bombing what they want to do. They want to establish their own state and government in Yemen. So that's quite interesting.
It seems to be Saudi Arabia versus Iran as a regional conflict, doesn't it? And that's why I think Saudi Arabia are worried that Iran are actually got this deal with the US, and that they're not going to be handicapped in the way they've been through the sanctions regime.
I'll say one more controversial thing. I'm worried that the USA doing this is trying to reinforce the division between the Shia and Sunni in that region, and reinforce having the two opposite powers working against each other. Because now we can see Saudi Arabia voicing its voice out against Iran, and this sort of talk in the newspapers, The Guardian, The Observer, The Independent, all the lot, the Sunni powers and the Shia powers, and I think this is maybe part of a bigger plan to divide that region even more, to have more control and powers over it.
I was going to suggest that it's a reaction to try and combat ISIS, which is undoubtedly a threat.
Well, I don't know, because we don't know who supports ISIS. Till now, I don't know who is supporting them.
Well, I think Garth's right. I think most of the funding's probably coming from Saudi Arabia. Although there's some people out there who think that ISIS doesn't actually exist. It's just, part of a conspiracy.
I think they exist.
They exist.
Yeah, I heard that from one of my students at school this week. It just goes to show what we believe isn't always accepted. Sorry, Garth, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say that they exist. I think they present a very big problem. I think one of the things we forget, when we went into the West, into Iraq, I mean by that America and ourselves and so on, although I remember Tony Blair talking about the fact we have nothing against the Iraqi people, we are only against one man, which was Saddam Hussein. Then the war was started with the bombing of shock and awe. And I was talking to an embedded journalist who was out there during the Iraq war, and he said to me soon afterwards, if ever they discover there wasn't weapons of mass destruction, he said this will have to be considered one of the most terrible wars because of the level of killing. And we think, that doesn't cause any effect. But it does. People grew up seeing this. They saw Abu Ghraib. They see what's going on. And so now we've got the nastiest and most vicious organisation that does have to be addressed. And it's also very technically, in terms of the use of the internet and so on, it's very well set up. And its propaganda is somehow affecting people. And I think there has to be ways to stop it. And I think America may well have recognised, I'm not sure whether they're dividing, but they might be, but I do think they're recognising that the Shia allies are perhaps more able to stop this, and therefore there should at least be a strengthening of that. I don't know, that's my surmise, because I think if you think about it, if you look at Hezbollah, if you look at Iran, if you look at what's happening in Syria, it isn't as clear as it was originally thought, and I think they recognise we may have to backpedal in order to stop this ISIS threat. It's just a conjecture, but when one looks at the situation, that might be a reason.
Well, Syria was one thing we were going to talk about, but we're a little bit short of time now. So, but I'm interested. I'm glad you mentioned Syria, because do they know what they're doing in Syria? They have to backpedal, possibly, but then are they even front pedaling? Who knows what they're doing? I'm not sure what they're doing. Anybody? Do
you mean the Americans?
Yes, the Americans with their airstrikes in Syria. I mean, it came to the news that British pilots have been taking part in those targets hitting the airstrikes. But are we supporting Assad, or are you supporting ISIL, or are you supposedly looking for the moderate forces? I'm not sure that Americans know what they're doing at all in Syria.
I think that they've been caught out, haven't they, really? Because who are the moderate forces? Yeah. Are there any moderate forces?
They themselves have been targets of ISIS, haven't they?
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, we're going to take a break, and we're going to listen to one of Garth's songs. As I said, Garth's a singer-songwriter, and this is called "Justice Like a River," and it's from, what's the album called, Brian?
The album's called "Justice Like a River."
Justice like a river, let it flow, let it flow. Good news for the poor, let it flow, let it flow. Like a never-failing stream of justice and of peace. Justice like a river, let it flow, let it flow. Let's unite under one tree, under the branches of the olive tree. Let's unite under one tree, under the shadow of the tree of life. Mercy flowing strongly, let it flow, let it flow. Healing, love and peace, let it flow, let it flow. Strength for the struggles, dignity for all. Justice like a river, let it flow, let it flow. Let's unite under one tree, under the branches of the olive tree. Let's unite under one tree, under the shadow of the tree of life. Justice like a river, let it flow, let it flow. Good news for the poor, let it flow, let it flow. Like a never-failing stream of justice and of peace. Justice like a river, let it flow, let it flow. Justice like a river, let it flow, let it flow.
Welcome back to the David Watson Show with me, David Watson, and our special guest Garth Hewitt, and Maha Younes, who's co-presenting with me. And we were talking before about the Middle East, and Garth is somebody who spent a lot of time in the Middle East, especially in Palestine and Israel. Am I right, Garth?
Yes, that's right. And I've been going there since about 1989 and regularly touring over there and visiting and taking groups over there. And in fact, I'm a canon of St George's Anglican Cathedral in Jerusalem. And the previous bishop, Bishop Ria Abu El-Assel, appointed me as a canon. And I thanked him very much when he appointed me and said, what does a canon do? He said, well, we would normally say, tell our story. But he said, you're doing that, so keep telling the story in your songs and in your books and so on. And so I feel a responsibility that to reflect, if you consider that the Anglican Diocese of Jerusalem is a diocese which covers Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon and Syria. So it's a very interesting area.
That's huge.
And predominantly most of the Christians are Palestinian. And so it's a story of the Palestinians, which obviously Christians are a minority within Palestine, but it's a minority a lot of people, including Christians, don't even know exist. So that's part of the story that I feel I should be telling.
Mm-hmm. So how did you, I was going to ask you, what came first, your ministry of music or your writing?
Ministry of Music, because the songwriting really came first, and then I wrote, in the mid-80s I wrote a book that was more talking about the journeys that I'd done to different parts of the world and the kind of lessons I'd learned from those places, and they were places of poverty and conflict and so on, and then you find this comes out in your songwriting. So I started then to write more about it. But when I went into the situation of Palestine and Israel, I found that there was a greater incentive to write then, because it was a story that the people, certainly in the Christian community, I think it was a story people didn't know. And so I was writing books for churches so that people would understand that perhaps the rather naive view that they'd got of what was happening between Israel and Palestinians may not be the true story. You know, have a listen to the people on the ground and see what they're saying.
What just for anybody out there listening, what's this naive view? What do you mean by that?
Well, by that, I think there are some Christians who take a fundamentalist line and what would be called a Christian Zionist line, and they believe God has given the land to the Israelis, and therefore, as far as they're concerned, the Palestinians should get out. They don't have a sense of the history of what's happened there, how long the Palestinians have been there. They don't have a sense of the relationship between Christians, Muslims and Jews that went on before the division of the land in 1948. And so they don't have a very good grasp of it, and you get a lot of support from certain types of churches, and particularly the fundamentalist churches in America. And I think we have to say this isn't the only Christian viewpoint. This isn't the only way to look at this. And I would like to see Christians reflecting a viewpoint that reflects more the justice that is right there in the understanding of the character of God that's reflected in the Bible, and a commitment to justice rather than a commitment to a God who appears to be biased and only liking one group of people. This is rather a view that says, regardless of whatever faith you have, there should be equality, there should be human rights, there should be international law. That's the route to go.
Were you yourself, did you understand the issues before you went there, or did you have a sort of Damascene moment when you went over there?
I had a Damascene moment before I went over there. In fact, in Uganda, I was sitting on a hill called Namirembe Hill in Kampala, and I was reading a book of the Bishop of Kampala, a book that he had, and he was talking about the Palestinians. I had never thought about the Palestinians. He's saying what great people they are. Well, if I had thought about them, I thought about, the Munich massacre or something like that, and I didn't understand that. And I suddenly thought, this is saying something about the Palestinian community which is quite different from everything I've been told. I've heard these stories about little Israel and so on, and then suddenly who are the Palestinians? So I then came back home, and just around that time there was on television I saw they were pushing the Palestinians out of Lebanon, and I thought, where is the land of Palestine? When I was a kid, the first film I ever saw in an old church hall was about Palestine. But where had it gone? Literally, it wasn't on the map.
It was a fictional film, or
No, it wasn't a fictional film.
Actually, a documentary. Then?
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah,
okay.
and and so I wrote a song called "Where Is the Land of Palestine" and started singing it, and I got reactions, not always friendly, and I realised I had put my finger on something really important, because some people they didn't want that, and others were saying, would you like to know where Palestine is and where Palestinians are? And so I arranged to go out there, and also I actually got a Palestinian. I read a book. I picked it up at Heathrow, a book called Blood Brothers, by a man called Elias Shakur, and he is a priest and now an archbishop from up in Galilee, and he told the story of the invasion in 48 and how they were driven out of their village and so on. And when I read this book, my jaw dropped. I thought, I just didn't know this. So we invited him to the Greenbelt Festival that happens here in the UK, and he came and he spoke about the situation, and it was opening people's eyes. And he said to me on a big Sunday morning event, he said, "Come and do this up in Galilee." So I felt I must go there, and then with another organisation said, "You must come and see." I went out there in 1989, and then I started writing the songs from my experience out there.
That's amazing. So would you say that where have you spent more time in Gaza or West Bank or Galilee, or do you try and see as much of everything as you can?
I've tried to see as much as everything, but Gaza we always used to go quite a bit in the early days, and even when we were taking groups, we would say the second day of the trip we'd go to Gaza, and it was a terrific experience for people, and we stayed out there on some of the trips. It was a very lovely place to visit, even though it was under occupation. We built strong links with the community there, and Amos Trust, the charity that I set up, supports projects out there. Mm-hmm. But in recent days, it's been very hard to get in. The current director of Amos Trust has been in there. I haven't been in there for a while.
Have you tried? Have you tried to get in?
I tried once, and the visa didn't come through, and I haven't tried recently, but
Right.
We've sent other groups of people in, so at least some of our representatives have been in there.
When you say visa, what do you mean? Like,
Well,
the Israelis didn't give you a visa, or
They have to give you, yes, you have to get a sort of
from the
visa or a
Israelis, so you
permission
have to
from
have a
the
permission.
Israeli to go into Gaza, yes.
Any reasons why they didn't let you? Didn't give it to you?
Well, it was to do with the timing of it. One of the things is you ask for one of a given period of time, and it might appear, but it might appear too late for you. I know that as a result, some people did go in afterwards, I think 3 months later or whatever. I didn't at that time. So I haven't been in for a while to Gaza. But the West Bank, and also inside Israel, that we've spent time with the Palestinians inside Israel who have they struggle also with the problems of being second-class citizens and so on. So I value just going out and talking with them and then writing songs or a book and talking about the story.
How was your reception when you went to Gaza? Because some when you read Lonely Planet, for example, they advise you not to even try to go to Gaza because it's dangerous, this, that and the other. Did you ever find any hostility there?
No, I never did. Gaza is very friendly. Look at what's happened to Gaza. Look at it's the shame, the utter shame of our world at the moment, that we take the most crowded piece of land on earth and we accept the bombing of it. Helpless people, the bombing of it. And our Prime Minister supports that. It is an utter shame. And when you go in there, what do you find? Wild people yelling at you? No, you don't. You find people saying, "You're very welcome. You're very welcome." And so we work with projects. We work with a hospital there called the Al Ali Hospital. We work with the Near East Council of Churches, who are busy doing a project to do job creation skills for young people. And it's been a place of welcome. Now, can bad things happen? Of course they can, because they are under unbelievable pressure.
Was it because of being in Palestine that you decided to set the Amos Trust up, or was it before?
No, it was set up before that. Okay. Yes. So it was set up before I ever went there, and it wasn't one of the first things that we started to support. It came in after about 4 years. as I saw more.
I believe you started with Nicaragua or Brazil, was that right?
We Nicaragua
Right.
came very early,
Yeah.
yes, and also in the early days we did some work with Uganda and in the Philippines, but Nicaragua, Palestine, work with street children in South Africa, and also with the Dalit community in India, those previously
Right.
called outcasts.
Right.
Those have been sort of 4 of the key areas, and we've developed more. You mentioned Brazil, because there we launched something called the Street Child World Cup in Brazil.
Yeah.
It's now become autonomous, but Amos kind of launched it
Brilliant.
once in South Africa and then in Brazil.
Okay.
And
I didn't realise Amos set it up. This
Hmm.
It's probably now more famous than the Amos Trust itself, isn't it?
make things autonomous and they become huge.
Could have privatised it. You know? What criteria do you use for the countries you choose to set up projects in?
Relationships, actually. In other words, you meet someone who you realise can really inform you, tell the story, and you think, well, we can trust these people. Let's build a relationship. Let's support. Let's fundraise if that seems the right thing to do. And with something like Palestine, we had met people, and then I got out there, and then you suddenly realise this is urgent. You know, there's something here that we can communicate to other people. With Nicaragua, it was somewhere where we really felt we can learn a lot of lessons from the community here, and about how they work in rural communities, how they're working with health and with debt relief and so on. And these are stories we can bring back home, and they're helpful to communities here. And then people say, well, actually, we'd quite like to visit it, and we organise trips and so on. So relationships is very key to what we do.
In fact, you mentioned trips, and I was going to ask you earlier, there are lots of Christian Zionist groups that set up trips to Israel and Palestine. They don't bill it as trip to Palestine, they say to Israel. And lots of Christians think that Bethlehem, for example, is in Israel, don't they, as a result? What is the problem here? Do you think it's just a question of getting the message through to these people, or is there something else?
Well, it is a question of getting that message through, but often it's very hard to get the message through. In other words, I've seen groups in Israel, in Bethlehem, and I know they don't know where they are. I can hear the guide speaking, and they're told, you're in Israel. They're not in Israel. And it's most extraordinary what's going on. Also, they're told, don't stay here long because it's dangerous, so let's get out. So they don't spend any money in Bethlehem. They don't spend a night in Bethlehem. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of alternative pilgrimage groups that are going into Bethlehem. They're spending time there. And they suddenly say, oh, my goodness, what a welcome we're getting. And instead of these trips that rush you from place to place to place to place, and you're not getting the facts. It's very interesting that when I went to South Africa during apartheid times, one of the things I noticed was the way in which they were keeping people out of the townships. When you visited, you were not allowed in the townships, so you had to break the law.
Because they were dangerous, weren't they? Supposedly dangerous.
Exactly. And one morning I'd been in Soweto, and I went back to speak at Witwatersrand University, and I was telling the students what I saw, and they were reacting very strangely. I said, come on, tell me, what's the matter? They said, we can't go there. I said, why not? It's half an hour down the road. They said, because we have to get a permit to go there, and we can't. When I saw Israel do the same thing with Israelis and say, you cannot go into the West Bank, I knew we were going the same apartheid route. Because why are they doing that? Yeah, of course they'll say it's for safety, and I understand there had been situations where people had been killed, but that was exceptional in a conflict situation. In fact, if you separate communities, you build the chance of apartheid seeming acceptable. And that's what's going on now. So Israelis feel they can't go in there because they're not allowed to. It would be dangerous. Of course, others go in because they know that they have friends there. It's all right.
Or, I had this conversation with a friend when I was in Palestine, that I said, like somebody in your book here said, well, Israelis aren't aware of what's going on. And he said, well, of course they are. I said, what do you mean they're not allowed in there? He said, well, they all do their time in the army. They know what's going on because they're the ones doing the occupation. And I said, well, not all the women. And he said, yeah, or maybe not all the women, but all the men have to do their stint in the army, so they cannot be excused.
And women, no, that's not true. And women.
Yeah, well, the women mostly get desk jobs, I think, though, don't they? They don't actually get put on the front line most of the time, do they?
Well, I've seen when there's more. I've seen. I mean, when I went, which was a very rare occasion, I went in 1996 and 1998 during the peacetime. All actually the army personnel that I dealt with from the Israeli army were women.
Okay, well that reinforces the point even more that they do know what's going on. So why aren't they doing something about it? Is it just a denial they're going into that? I mean, they're more important than the Palestinians. Is that the problem?
Yes. Sometimes I do think of it. It's a question of mind and matter. They don't mind and we don't, and the Palestinians don't matter. But it's a wider issue of education, and when I say education, not necessarily that you earn a university degree. I mean as in exactly knowing what's happening, not camouflaging it with a different story. I mean, even The Guardian in Easter, I think you might have come across this, when they were talking about Easter celebrations in Jerusalem, they described it as Jerusalem, Israel. And that's a big newspaper that should know better. And we campaigned all morning, me, my sister, and my friend from Jerusalem. He's from the Eastern Church, and we campaigned that morning to say to them, could you please at least correct it, say something. Jerusalem is not in Israel. You can't describe these celebrations. My friend was saying all of those people in these pictures are my friends, and I know for sure they're not Israeli, and they don't see themselves living in Israel. But
nevertheless, the narrative has changed because of the facts on the ground, and Israel has actually put its parliament in Jerusalem now. So
I know.
So and the actual conurbation of Greater Jerusalem has encroached so far into the West Bank. It's no longer clear where the green line is. Even
we are dealing with a very strong PR system, PR war, in fact, from the Israelis, and it started from the 30s.
It always surprises me when people say that Israel's got bad PR, because I don't think it has. I think they've got very good PR.
The best going.
How they can do what they do and still
get away
be accepted as a kind of. I had a conversation with a teacher the other day. Actually, I wasn't part of the conversation. I heard a teacher talking to a technician. She said she was going to Israel during the summer, and he said, yeah, Israel's great. I had to bite my tongue off almost, but I didn't.
The thing is with this, and I guess maybe you have some ideas about this. I used to get really upset when people used to say 1948, the independent war, and I was like, but no, it wasn't independent. There wasn't a country called Israel before 1948. They came, they expelled the Palestinians out, and it was very difficult for me to understand why they say this. Till one day I watched a documentary. This is a little bit change of course perhaps what we're saying, called Jaffa, the Orange's Clockwork by E.L. Sivan, and he studied documentaries and posters about the Jaffa oranges trade at that time, and the fact that there were so many BBC made documentaries about the idea of Israel, and the fact that they come to cultivate the land, the desert, nobody existed, nobody lived there, and that was a series of long documentaries that were broadcasted late 30s, early 40s, and that started to make me realize, okay, there was a PR machine working then. There was this idea that people believed in, and when I saw these documentaries, I felt, okay, if I was somebody who did not know the region, I'm not from there, I would believe in this beautiful idea that is Israel, that will bring nurture and revive the biblical land. They did not know that Jaffa oranges or Burtuqal Jaffa was a trade already run by Palestinians. They were Jews, Christian, Muslims, etc. At the time, we didn't even discuss religion. People didn't know what their religion was. And it was a beautiful trade, supported then by the Palestinians. But then the trademark started to change into an Israeli trademark known now as Jaffa oranges.
Garth, what do you think? What do you think was a way forward for the Palestinians to try and liberate themselves from the occupation? What would you suggest or advocate as a way forward?
The trouble is, the international community does not believe in international law, and so the supporters in different countries, like our country for instance, need to push our government to come in line with international law. It refuses to do what it signed up to, like its commitment to the Fourth Geneva Convention and so on. It its commitment to human rights, it ignores it when it comes to Israel. Stop ignoring it. So, because they ignore it, we must do boycott, divestment and sanctions, because what other route is there other than saying, if one is committed to violence, which I'm not, one would say, well then, let the Palestinians do violence. I don't actually believe in that as a way forward, although that's not my decision to make, but I believe that if we can't get our country to abide by international law and the other countries, then we've got to go crazy over boycott, divestment and sanctions, because until Israel wakes up, they will do whatever they want because no one's stopping them. And it's very, very worrying. And it's worrying for Israel. A Palestinian friend of mine says, why do we want boycott, divestment, sanctions? It's to bring Israel to their senses, not to their knees. And that really, it's important for the community of Palestine and the community of Israel. It's very important that we change the understanding and the international understanding. And so I believe that's step one, the international pressure. The voices coming from inside Palestine we should be following. And civil society in Palestine have said they want this. The church has said that in Palestine. That's a small group again, but it's a group that should affect the churches. Our Archbishop has not been listening to that voice. We've had the Kairos Palestine document that says boycott, divestment, sanctions, but pleading with the world and the Christian world to listen to them. And so again, there needs to be a listening to what the Palestinian voices have said. And then when they ask us for support, we can give it, because otherwise there's just this endorsing governments who frankly are only on one side, and that's the Israeli side.
You're a Church of England minister, though, and as I remember it, the Church of England was very supportive of the sanctions movement against apartheid South Africa. Why has the Church of England been so slow to take up boycott and divestment sanctions against Israel?
It's because
it's certainly not even supporting it now, is it? As you said, Archbishop Welby is not very supportive.
It's pressure from sometimes there is this desire that they don't want to be thought anti-Semitic, and because the argument is always used, if anyone puts their head up they're called anti-Semitic, then they would be very frightened at that. And I think when you consider someone like Desmond Tutu really spoke to the church in this country during the apartheid regime in South Africa. Desmond Tutu now is calling for BDS
has been
against Israel, but the church hasn't been listening to him now. So I think there is a failure to speak out with honesty and integrity from the church, and I believe that has to change. Otherwise we're really reneging on the values that we say we're committed to.
Did you have a take on that, Maha?
Well, I was trying to check my facts, but I know that the Church of England invest in arms, don't they? They have £10 million investment, right?
In arms?
Yes.
They may do.
So one of the major arms firms, and one of these are Israeli, right? So I guess that would go if they would to support the boycott campaign, that would go against what they financially support, and I think that is the issue. We have to be transparent and actually say what the Church of England is up to, really on the ground, and what the governments are up to. And when people know the reality, you said something, forgive me to say this, but you said something very pinkwashing Israel, that is, they don't want to appear anti-Semitic. I don't think that's really the issue. This is the thing that we are led to believe so that we don't tap into that discussion. But actually the issue is it's their investments, and I think it goes against.
I'm not quite sure. I'd be interested to get any information of that sort, because
it was recently in the Independent, actually, in 2013, has discussed that issue, that they invest £10 million in arms, in major arms firms.
Okay, and in terms of Israel?
I should imagine.
Just in arms trade per se, are you saying? Okay, yes. Well, I'm glad you've told me that, because that's something we'll campaign about, because at the moment the issue is that they're using Church House, Westminster, for conferences that involve arms traders.
Exactly.
And so that's what we're campaigning about. I didn't know there was investment. I'll look into that.
Thank you for that. Just one quick question. Will you be going back to Palestine again very soon? Or
Next year.
Next year.
This has been tricky. We haven't been there this year. I normally go every year, and as a canon of the cathedral, I should be there every year. I should preach in the cathedral every year. But I haven't this year. But we're taking a group back next year, and in June, and we're very much looking forward to going back.
Well, I wish you all the best with your ventures. One more point from Maha?
Yeah, I just want to ask you something. Since we are a year on from what had happened in Gaza last year, you told me a nice story just before we went on air on a song you've written, The Broken Hearts of Gaza. Would you tell us a little? How did that come about? If we have time.
I think so.
The Broken Heart of Gaza, it was Operation Cast led, and I was so overwhelmed by what I was seeing, and having friends in Gaza, it's very
Which year was that?
difficult. That's going back the end of 2008, beginning of 2009.
First one.
And then I got a letter from a priest in Gaza, Father Manuel Musalem, who was at Holy Family Catholic Church. And it was an unbelievable letter. I mean, really powerful. So I thought, I'll put these words into a song. So I just say there's a message from Father Musalem, and then they're his words. And he used a prayer which he and his people said, on the top of each hour we'll pray this prayer, O Lord of peace, rain peace upon us. So if the bombs are falling or if they're not falling, we'll say this prayer. And so that's the chorus of the song. And the song is very powerful because his words are very powerful. And I sang it in a church in Ramallah, and the vicar had told me he didn't want me to sing it when I was intending to sing it. He said, would you sing it at the end of the service? I didn't know why he'd said that. And so I did what I was told. And just as I'd finished singing it, Father Musalem walked in. And I had no idea. This was in Ramallah, so I had no idea he was there. I didn't know he was out of Gaza. And he said, sing the song again. And there's a line in the song that says, we will not live as slaves, we will be free. And he stood up and he walks with a stick, and he raised his stick in the air, and it was a very emotive moment. And I thought, this is it. We're asking the people of Gaza to live as slaves, but they're refusing. And I think I was very grateful for his words, and for that, that song I sing often, particularly when we look back at the attack 1 year ago on Gaza. Again, it seems just so relevant to that.
Exactly.
Thank you for that story, Garth.
Thank you.
I'm glad we got it in time. We're just going to go out listening to one more of Garth's songs. This one's called Bethlehem is Calling, which is similar to the book that I've got of his, which is called Bethlehem Speaks. So I'll be back in 2 weeks' time talking to urban poets, and probably be sharing the airwaves with Liam Davis will be back, and maybe we'll talk a bit more sport on that occasion. But tonight I want to thank my guests, Garth Hewitt, singer-songwriter and clergyman and canon of Jerusalem. Sorry, not Jerusalem.
St George's Cathedral.
St George's Cathedral in Jerusalem, and Maha Younes, activist, scientist, and sometime film commentator. Thanks to our producer as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bethlehem is calling quietly through the season's noise, whispering of a conspiracy of love. Here it comes, the news of love, the birth of God's new way of love, breaking through the darkness, bringing light. And here it comes from Bethlehem. Bow down low, start again, as a humble, generous God stops to show us the way of love from Bethlehem. Bethlehem is calling quietly, brings a gift of peace, whispering of a conspiracy of love, into a world of war wars and violence, this loving calls the one to heal us. Beat the swords to plowshares, start again. And here he comes from Bethlehem, bow down low, start again. As a humble, generous God stops to show us the way of love from Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is calling quietly, if you're still you'll hear, whispering of a conspiracy of love, breaking through to make you whole, a touch of love to heal the soul, the humble way of God bringing the light. And here he comes from Bethlehem, bow down low, start again. As a humble, generous God stops to show us the way of love from Bethlehem. And here he comes from Bethlehem, bow down low, start again. As a humble, generous God stops to show us the way of love from Bethlehem. Bethlehem. Oh, Bethlehem. Bethlehem.